It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The Prime Minister agrees a new deal for the UK with the EU, insisting it will cut red tape and boost British business.
Britain is back on the world stage, working with our partners, doing deals that will grow our economy.
But critics say the deal is a betrayal of Brexit, and measures to extend fishing rights to EU boats are a disaster. Also tonight, President Trump holds a 2-hour phone call with President Putin and says Ukraine's ceasefire talks will begin immediately. Plus, Israel's ground assault in Gaza draws international criticism after limited aid is allowed in for the first time in months. Lineker apologises as his exit from the BBC is confirmed over an anti-Semitic post on social media. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. The Prime Minister has hailed a new deal between the UK and the European Union as a landmark agreement that puts Britain back on the world stage. Sir Keir Starmer insists that the deal will cut red tape and help boost the economy. But the Prime Minister is facing accusations of betraying Brexit by forging closer ties with the EU. Well, under the deal, a new defence pact will give British firms access to a European investment fund worth £150 billion. The government says UK passport holders will have shorter waits at airports as more e-gates open up across Europe. Both parties say they will cooperate on a youth experience scheme, which could see young people able to work and travel freely in Europe again. And most contentiously, Sir Keir Starmer has agreed to extend EU access to British fishing waters for 12 years. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, has tonight's first report.
Brussels top brass here in London. Brexit battles behind us now.
Is this a EU-UK reset?
The EU and UK have clearly made up. Affection replacing acrimony in this new era of Anglo-EU relations. This UK-EU deal has been months in the making, and now the leaders are in there signing it off. Both sides will claim wins, but what is the UK giving up? And will the Prime Minister face a bit of a backlash? After the formal agreement, the big sell.
Britain is back on the world stage, working with our partners, doing deals that will grow our economy and putting more money in the pockets of working people.
The warmth in this room and between these two, genuine.
What we have agreed today is historic. But the message we are sending to the world today is equally, if not more important. We in Europe stick together.
You have given the European Union 12-year access to UK fishing waters, and you have agreed, having ruled it out last year, in principle to a youth mobility scheme. There are those today criticising you for backsliding on Brexit. Don't they have a point?
This is a comprehensive agreement. I look at how does it impact on working people? What are those supermarkets saying? What are those businesses saying? Because they're all welcoming it.
The celebratory mood continued on a tour of HMS Sutherland, an anti-submarine warship moored on the Thames. For these leaders, all of this a symbol of their defence alliance. But one possible battle ahead could be around how much of the EU's €150 billion rearmament fund the UK will be able to tap into. The EU's most senior diplomat acknowledging the tensions. There has been some reports that there is a view amongst some European colleagues and allies that there should be a limitation on the amount the UK should be allowed to access of that fund, given that we are not in the European Union. Is that correct?
Of course, these discussions are there. We have the wounds from Brexit very clearly. I mean, you wanted to exit European Union, and then there are many voices who say that you shouldn't have the same benefits from the European instruments that the European Union countries have.
The Conservatives already calling this deal a Brexit surrender.
This is a complete sellout. I am completely shocked that Keir Starmer has agreed to all of this, concession after concession. What he wants to do is just be able to say we're closer to the EU without working in the national interest.
Brexit has, for the past decade, defined the relationship between the European Union and the UK. And this today, then, this deal really is the beginning of a new era. It's been forged by a Prime Minister who is more instinctively pro-European, but it's also born out of necessity for both sides as they face into a more insecure world. This then is a new chapter. The big question is how it will be written in the coming months as two sides hammer out the details. The reset is now on in the spirit of reconciliation, but there will be hard bargaining ahead too. And Keir Starmer still needs to prove to the public this really is a win. Beth Rigby, Sky News, London.
So will the deal with the EU actually benefit the UK's economy? Our economics and data editor Ed Conway has this analysis.
Now, if there's one thing Keir Starmer wants you to take away from this, the UK-EU deal, it is that it's a big deal. Lots of money, he says, generated by this. But does that really stack up? Well, here's how much money they say it'll bring in. £9 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it? But you've got to compare that £9 billion, which is the impact on GDP, gross domestic product, total amount of income we generate in the country in 2040. Compare it with what GDP actually is or will be by then, and let's bring that up there. And oh dear, it's so big that it's actually gone beyond the side of that screen. So we're going to have to squidge this axis down so we can see both of them fully comparable. And look, £4.1 trillion, £9 billion. That's a tiny sliver, really. And when you work out what that is as a percentage of that, it's 0.2% of GDP. Not nothing, bigger actually than the Indian deal, but still not massive. And if you take that, so the 0.2% of GDP, that's from the food standards, the emissions control programme, add on other things. So, for instance, you've got the youth mobility scheme. Now, that might bring in a small amount, but it might actually generate a bit more. So that's a best-case scenario, 0.45% of GDP. Stack it all up, and other things as well. You might be looking at kind of around 0.8% of GDP as a result of this, positive. But here's the thing, you've got to offset the negative impact of Brexit. And most economists think there is a negative impact just because you're making it harder to trade with our biggest trading partner. And that negative impact, it's contested, this number, but that's what the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, thinks it is, 4%. And if you take that away from that, you're still in negative territory. So still worse off as a result of Brexit, according to that OBR estimate, still 3.2% smaller than pre-Brexit. Now, that's the big picture. But, of course, there are lots of different parts of this. So there's the deal on migration, specifically students. And the background to that is that since Brexit, since those Brexit rules came into force, just look, it used to be that EU migration was bigger than the rest of the world. But look, the total's gone up, non-EU migration has gone up an enormous amount, EU migration has gone down, and that follows for students. So that's overall, but it follows for students as well. So it's about raising EU student migration and bringing down non-EU migration at the same time, which is another policy. Also, there's fishing. So quotas, and this is immensely complicated, so this is a simplification, believe it or not, but quotas have come down for various different species of fish. This is quotas for for EU fishermen and fishing vessels in the UK, and they've come down, and the idea is basically that stays more or less where it is for the next 12 years. So that's fishing, but the key thing really, overall, is to note that despite all of those numbers, despite all of those big figures, this is not a legally binding document. This is the document that was released alongside these talks, and it underlines that so far this is just exploratory talks, and the actual deal, that has yet to come. We're going to have to wait a bit longer for the physical thing.
Ed Conway there. Well, let's go live to Westminster and our political correspondent, Liz Bates. Some pretty punchy newspaper front pages dropping this evening, Liz. His win-win is looking like a hard sell for some.
Yes, Anna, and that is the big political danger with anything like this. When you try to improve that relationship with the EU as a UK Prime Minister, you can be accused of trying to undo Brexit. That was always potentially on the cards. When you look back on the day, it was a real marked change in tone. We saw the Prime Minister next to Ursula von der Leyen. It was a real warm words being exchanged between the pair, and what you could call the the first steps towards a pretty comprehensive reset today on the table. It went down reasonably well with the business community. There was a business reception here in Downing Street with cabinet ministers and business leaders. There was a meeting between Keir Starmer and his Labour MPs. It went down pretty well with them as well. They were feeling very positive about it. The criticism, of course, the big issue that was picked up on was this issue of fishing and letting some European countries back into UK waters. And political opponents picked up on that immediately, and it did feel at a point today like we were re-entering that pretty divisive, toxic Brexit debate. The Conservatives and Reform using that language of surrender, and we see that now on on the front of some of the newspapers. So that is the danger. It has been very corrosive in British politics before as an issue. It's brought down prime ministers before. This is something that the government has been pushing back on very hard today, very much wanting to stress. This is about improving the UK's relationship with the EU and doing deals as they have been doing with other countries across the world. That's how they want to present it. They certainly don't want to go back down that Brexit road, but it may be out of their hands.
Liz, live there in Downing Street. Thank you. Now, both President Trump and President Putin were upbeat tonight after a 2-hour phone call about the war in Ukraine. Mr. Trump said talks on a ceasefire would begin immediately, and Mr. Putin said he was prepared to discuss compromises. But behind the smiles, there was no indication of a shift in Russia's position, and America's patience appears to be running out. Sky's Ivor Bennett reports now from Moscow.
The clouds gathered in Moscow ahead of the call, but the storm never came. American pressure that was forecast apparently faded away, with the Kremlin once again untouched and unmoved. Vladimir Putin took the call at a music school, where his comments to the media afterwards revealed Russia's tune hasn't changed, show a willingness to achieve peace without actually agreeing to it.
We have agreed with the President of the United States that Russia will propose and is ready to work with the Ukrainian side on a memorandum on a possible future peace accord, defining a number of positions such as, for example, the principles of settlement, the timing of a possible peace agreement.
But still not the ceasefire Donald Trump demands. He's threatened sanctions on Russia and said he'd walk away from peace talks if there's no progress. But still no sign of either. Instead, we're told the leaders discussed the impressive prospects for US-Russia relations. So the carrot was there, but not the stick.
We just spent 2.5 hours talking to Vladimir Putin, and I think some progress has been made. It's a terrible situation going on over there. 5,000 young people every single week are being killed. So hopefully we did something. We also spoke to the heads of most of the European nations, and we're trying to get that whole thing wrapped up. What a shame that it ever started in the first place.
Russian attacks were unrelenting in the build-up to the phone call, and afterwards Ukraine appeared unimpressed by the result. President Zelensky calling for a high-level meeting with Russia, America and the EU.
Our side, we really want to finish this war. I'm not sure that Russia is ready, and we don't trust them. And that's why we wanted from them very much ceasefire at the first step.
It's 2 months since Donald Trump first called for a 30-day truce, and since then, very little has actually changed. Vladimir Putin continues to say that a ceasefire is possible, but only if certain conditions are met. Like, for example, a halt to Western military aid to Ukraine. In short, it's still very much peace on Russia's terms and time frame.
It seems the only thing Vladimir Putin did give Donald Trump in their conversation was warm words. The Kremlin said he congratulated the US president on the birth of his grandson, and apparently that's still enough. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Moscow.
The leaders of the UK, France and Canada have tonight threatened what they called concrete actions against Israel over its military operation in Gaza. It came after Israel allowed only a limited amount of aid into Gaza today for the first time in almost 3 months. The United Nations dismissed the shipments as merely a drop in the ocean. Israel's new offensive against Hamas in Gaza is continuing, with one Israeli minister warning today that Gaza's entire population could be removed. Well, nearly 3/4 of Gaza is now covered by Israeli evacuation orders, which today were expanded significantly around Khan Yunis, shown in red. For now, aid is being organised by the UN, but Israel says in the coming days it will start to be distributed by private US companies. Israel has levelled 4 sites in southern and central Gaza, which are expected to be used. Satellite imagery shows a build-up of walls, barbed wire fences and military personnel. In the meantime, officials in Gaza say 136 people have died over the last 24 hours as Israel's ground offensive continues. A warning that this report from our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, contains images which you may find distressing.
Israeli special forces went into Khan Yunis this morning under the cover of heavy shelling and airstrikes. The IDF said that the target was a Palestinian militant. But as always, civilians were among the dead and wounded. Some of them were brought to the city's hospital on the back of a flatbed truck. Wake up, she's screaming. The body is her daughter Aline. This storage facility at the hospital was hit, destroying medicine. The hospital's director said that most of the supplies were for dialysis patients.
They claim they targeted a police headquarters. That place used to be a civilian police station before the war. Now it's just a storage area, what's left of the medical supplies from Nasser Hospital. This is the result behind me.
The Israeli military says its ground operation in Gaza is only just getting underway. They released these images of troops and tanks moving through Gaza. They've warned there is more to come. After an 11-week siege, Israel says it will now allow what it describes as basic levels of aid into Gaza.
We've been receiving reports that there is about 20 or 30 trucks or even less that are planned to come in. These are not confirmed reports, but the needs in Gaza are much, much higher than that. So we do hope that it's much more than just 20 or 30, because that's going to be a drop in the ocean amid this sea of needs.
Israel's finance minister today said that Gaza will be wiped out and suggested the entire population will be permanently removed.
The population will reach the south of the Strip and from there, with God's help, move to third countries under President Trump's plan. This is a change in the course of history, nothing less.
The IDF has now declared the whole of Khan Yunis, Gaza's second largest city, a combat zone, forcing tens of thousands to flee. Hussein has been walking through the night and the heat of the day.
I've been walking since 1 a.m. I'm heading towards the beach area. I'm helping my son. He's gone to get his wife and family now. He has 5 kids. We'll be together when he comes back.
With Israel's repeated threats to occupy Gaza, this now feels like an exodus, a slow, reluctant march to an unknown future, as the war, again, closes in around them. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Well, the Israeli Prime Minister has just responded to that threat of concrete action against his country by the UK, Canada and France over the military operation in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu said by asking Israel to end a defensive war for a survival before Hamas terrorists on our border are destroyed, and by demanding a Palestinian state, the leaders in London, Ottawa and Paris are offering a huge prize for the genocidal attack on Israel on October the 7th. Donald Trump is holding a news conference in the White House. Let's listen.
Sorry, you previously on Truth Social implored President Putin to stop. You wrote Vladimir stop, and he didn't stop, quite the contrary. I'm curious, did you bring that up on your call with him today?
No, I didn't bring that up, but I did say it's time, you got to stop this thing. And I believe he wants to stop. Look, I would be, I think, very able to tell whether or not he wanted to or what. I thought there was a very good chance, like a 50-50 chance, that he would say, I want to take the whole thing. I didn't know what he was going to say. And then they have a different kind of a problem. But I believe he wants to stop. Pretty sure.
Just now about backing away or walking away if it looks like it's going to be an intractable problem. Do you have a red line in your head of what would cause you to back away? And
Yeah, in my head, but not something I'm going to announce. But yeah, definitely in my head I do, yeah. Because this isn't our war. This is not my war. This is not the war. I mean, we got ourselves entangled in something that we shouldn't have been involved in. And we would have been a lot better off, and maybe the whole thing would have been better off, because it can't be much worse. It's a real mess. It's a death trap. So I think that, yeah, I would say I do have a certain line, but I don't want to say what that line is, because I think it makes the negotiation even more difficult than it is. Yes, please.
Mr. President, thank you all for your sacrifice. I'm so sorry for your loss and everybody. You mentioned the bloodbath you want to see end in Ukraine. You mentioned that you believe Putin wants peace, but he just attacked Ukraine yesterday. So what makes you think that he wants peace?
Well, he's in a war, you know. I mean, nobody said don't. They're fighting. They're attacking each other. And people are dying all the time. He's in a war. He's fighting a war. Nobody said he was going to stop. I think, is it terrible? Yeah, it's terrible. I think it's terrible.
Can you weigh in on President Biden? President Biden was diagnosed with cancer of the war, and then I want to ask you about reconciliation. Why haven't you increased the sanctions on Russia yet?
Well, because I think there's a chance of getting something done. And if you do that, you can also make it much worse. But there could be a time when that's going to happen. Yep.
Mr. President,
Who's going to say
with the ratings downgrade from...
Do you want to respond to President Biden being diagnosed with cancer? Are you going to call your predecessor?
I think it's very sad, actually. I'm surprised that it wasn't, you know, the public wasn't notified a long time ago, because to get to stage 9, that's a long time. I just had my physical. You saw that. You saw the results of that particular test. I think that test is standard to pretty much anybody getting a physical, good physical. We had the doctors at the White House and over at Walter Reed, which is a fantastic hospital, do it. I did a very complete physical, including cognitive tests. I'm proud to announce I aced it. Got them all. I got them all right. You proud of me? Yes. Your husband would be proud of me for getting them all right. It's a little risk. If I didn't get them all right, these people would be after me. It would be not a good situation. But I think, frankly, anybody running for president should take a cognitive test. They say it's unconstitutional, but I would say in that particular case, having a cognitive test wouldn't be so bad. But when you take tests, medical, as a male, that test is very standard. I don't know if it's given to everybody, but it's given just about. And it takes a long time to get to that situation. Now, I think, to get to a stage 9, I think that if you take a look, it's the same doctor that said that Joe was cognitively fine. There was nothing wrong with him. Well, he said, if it's the same doctor, he said there was nothing wrong there. And that's being proven to be a sad situation. And the auto pen is becoming a very big deal. The auto pen is becoming a big deal because it seems like that maybe was the president who ever operated the auto pen. But when they say that that was not good, they also, you have to look and you have to say that the test was not so good either. In other words, there are things going on that the public wasn't informed, and I think somebody's going to have to speak to his doctor, if it's the same, or even if it's two separate doctors. Why wasn't the cognitive ability, why wasn't that discussed? And I think the doctor said he's just fine, and it's turned out that's not so. It's very dangerous. Look, this is no longer politically correct. This is dangerous for our country. Look at the mess we're in. You're talking about all these questions on Ukraine and Russia that would have never happened. As an example, if I were president, it would have never happened. The other thing is you have to say, why did it take so long? I mean, when you, this takes a long time. It can take years to get to this level of danger. So it's a very, very sad situation, and I feel very badly about it. And I think people should try and find out what happened, because I'll tell you, I don't know if it had anything to do with the hospital. Walter Reed is really good. They're some of the best doctors I've ever seen. I don't even know if they were involved, but a doctor was involved in each case. Maybe it was the same doctor, and somebody is not telling the facts. That's a big problem.
President Zelensky of Ukraine says that the Ukrainians are ready for a ceasefire. They're ready for peace negotiations. In your mind, is Ukraine doing enough to get this peace?
I'd rather tell you in about 2 weeks from now, because I can't say yes or no. I think, look, he's a strong person. Zelensky, a strong guy, and he's not the easiest person to deal with. But I think that he wants to stop. He's, not. It's a very bad thing that's happening over there. I think he wants to stop. But I could answer that question better in 2 weeks or 4 weeks from now. I hope the answer is that he wants to get it solved. I want to thank everybody very much. And on behalf of the United States of America, we greatly honor your family and your friends and everybody that had to suffer so much. But you have some 3 great men that are looking down on you, and they're very proud right now. They're very proud. This is the Oval Office, and they're a big part of it now. They're a part of the Oval Office, the White House. And thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you, Sheriff, for coming. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Donald Trump there reflecting on the news of Joe Biden's aggressive prostate cancer, expressing surprise that the public wasn't notified long ago about the diagnosis, picking up perhaps on some of the theories online about that, but substantively talking about that phone call with President Putin. I think something is going to happen on Russia, Ukraine, he said. I think Putin has had enough. I believe Putin wants to stop. He also said he has a red line in his head as to when he will stop pushing for some sort of resolution in the conflict. Wouldn't say what that red line would be, and also welcoming the suggestion that mediation could be carried out by Pope Leo at the Vatican as well. He said also that big egos are involved in the conflict, also suggesting that Zelensky himself was a strong guy. So the latest there on President Trump speaking to President Putin and to Zelensky, and indeed briefing European leaders as well earlier today. Now, Gary Lineker's 30-year career at the BBC is to come to an end after Sunday's edition of Match of the Day. The broadcaster today again apologised for the hurt and upset caused after he shared a post online with anti-Semitic connotations. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris has more.
Did he jump before being pushed? Gary Lineker less vocal in public than online. Sharing an anti-Semitic trope on Instagram caused his premature BBC departure, and that was the platform to announce it.
Last week, I shared a post here on Instagram that contained an emoji that has awful connotations. Unfortunately, I did not see the emoji. If I had, I would never, ever have shared it. The minute I was made aware, I quickly deleted the post and went on to make an apology. I would like, once again, to say I'm sorry unreservedly for the hurt and upset caused. It was a genuine mistake and oversight, but I should have been more diligent.
This was the understated sign-off from Saturday's FA Cup final.
For now, goodbye.
The final goodbye will be on Sunday. It was always intended to be his last match of the day, but now he won't be staying to present the FA Cup and World Cup next season as planned.
Ultimately, Gary Lineker didn't want to be constrained by the impartiality rules the BBC staff here have to abide by. On Gaza, he claims silence equated to complicity. But even he accepted he crossed the line with a post he insisted wasn't knowingly anti-Semitic, but was deleted. The apology wasn't enough to save him, ending his 3 decades on the BBC in scandal rather than celebration. The BBC's Director General, Tim Davies, said, "Gary has acknowledged the mistake he made. Accordingly, we have agreed he will step back from further presenting after this season. We want to thank him for the contribution he has made." The BBC turned the former England captain into an accomplished broadcaster and the face of football, handed the prime Premier League highlight slot in 1999 and eventually the BBC's biggest salary. But finding his voice politically in public became increasingly problematic and a lightning rod for the BBC's critics. The boundaries of acceptable commentary on the Israel-Hamas conflict were stretched to the limit. And for one of Lineker's former bosses, this isn't about denying him a social conscience, but offence that damages the BBC.
Of course, people can have the right to speak out, but you are representing all the licence fee payers who pay your salary. And it's very hard in those cases to take strongly political positions in which you are essentially disagreeing with half the people who support your salary. So that's why I think the BBC has to be impartial.
After being a fixture of football coverage, a television era is ending. Gary Lineker has a flourishing podcasting empire to focus on. Even freer to speak out beyond football. It won't be the BBC's problem anymore. Rob Harris, Sky News, Central London.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we will take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the Sun's political editor, Harry Cole, and the Guardian's deputy political editor, Jessica Elgott. Welcome, great to see both of you. Among the stories we'll be discussing, I suppose no guessing tonight, this on the front page of The Telegraph, which greets the news of the new deal between the UK and the EU with the blunt headline, "Kiss goodbye to Brexit." That and plenty more after the break.